Hey everybody, today we're doing another topic video, and this week, of course, it is still October, which means the month of Halloween, which means this week I get to ask you what movies have scared you the most, as I tend to do in Halloween. Before we get into that, first of all, I will plug my website. It is deepfocuslens.com. I am an artist. I do commission portraits, and I sell prints of my work. If that's something that you're interested in, you can always go to the website below, and if you have any questions about a print or a commission, you can always email me. My email is in the description box below. All right. The Fly, 1986. I was 9 years old when I saw it, and it terrified me. Obviously, I've never seen anything remotely like that before, and I can vividly remember the fear and tension I felt throughout the movie. Don't know why I didn't turn the TV off. The makeup, the special effects, the sheer visceral experience was simply too much for me at the time. It left me scared for a long time. Cronenberg is, of course, a master director, and this movie explores many of the themes he's interested in, so I can see why he was drawn to the material and why he was able to produce a movie of this caliber. That's a really good choice. Yeah, The Fly is a really interesting movie. It was something the first time I saw it, it was certainly not what I expected. And yeah, it is like a version, in a sense, a modern version for its time, of Metamorphosis by Franz Kafka, which is a story I always was really taken by just when I read it originally. And I think this film captures a lot of that pain, as you say. There's something about the body horror genre that I think is particularly visceral naturally. Of course, it is naturally physical as well, and that's why it affects people. Your body, this host, is no longer something that you have control over. And in here, they go for a very tragic way of showing that, with a lot of the detail, a lot of kind of in slow motion, you see this person slowly change. And that is really devastating, a really unique angle. So yeah, I mean, not a typical sort of scare in the traditional sense, but more, yes, like an emotional one where you really feel that transition. You feel the weight of loss. The Eyes of My Mother. The whole film tries to put you into the killer's perspective, but that scene with the last female victim who was trying to scream but was no longer able to, so disturbing and cruel. I considered turning it off, but was so engaged with the story and the kind of hypnotic way the whole thing is put together, with the music and the black and white cinematography, like you'd like to turn away, but you just can't. Oh man, I haven't seen that movie in so many years, but I did review it. But yeah, no, I agree with you. It is a deeply disturbing film, deeply melancholy. I say melancholy is maybe a light word. It's just bleak. I want to say it's just bleak, bleak, bleak. But yes, it has a gorgeous look to it, very kind of poetic and meditative in its style, going more for like almost like an Ingmar Bergman sort of look, I think, very artistic. And yes, in the ways that are so beautiful, they draw you in a certain way. But there is something about that style, like the film before in a way, even though they're very different films, but The Fly, this kind of slow turning of something, rather than relying more on the shock, things that are really jarring, like a scare in a typical sense. This goes for the slow burn. And I think there's a whole nother level of devastation to that. And I tend to be more drawn to that sort of horror myself. William Friedkin's The Exorcist. I woke up at 4 a.m. and thought to myself, I have never seen The Exorcist, and that's a crime. I went from a drowsy daze to being paralyzed in fear. I knew it had a reputation for being insane, but it found a way to be even more shocking than I expected. It really is a horror film that fires on all cylinders. Okay, so I often hear one or the other. I hear this kind of reaction where some people really, really are affected by The Exorcist and other people that aren't affected by it at all. Now, I admit I am in the category of it didn't affect me. I had a similar sort of situation where I was like, I've never seen The Exorcist. I need to see it. So I did, and I was a teenager at the time, and it didn't really affect me much in the way that you're describing here. Though I did like the film very much. But I do admit, I think it's one that I do need to go back and see, because at times there are movies, like, I just reviewed The Blair Witch Project as an example, and that movie never freaked me out or haunted me in any sort of way. And now, returning to it as somebody older, I find it very disturbing and very haunting in ways that I didn't before. So it could be one of those situations. But yes, that is something I would like to go back and review at some point. Watched The House That Jack Built on My Own in a nearly empty theater on a freezing Thursday night in December. A tiny theater in North London. Left the theater feeling very vulnerable. Okay, so this is a movie I have not seen before. And it's a movie I really want to see. It's on my list of things to get to review, because I do really like movies that go for the jugular in terms of just psychological distortion and all of that, wrestling with that sense of control. And I've seen enough of it to know that, like, yeah, this is something that naturally is going to pique my interest. But I hear a lot of this sort of reaction. And I think it's the idea of, losing control of your mind is the worst. It's the worst. Like the worst lack of control. Without your mind, you have nothing. And so when you watch movies like that, or especially movies where people are trapped in a psych ward, where, like all of the idea of logic is starting to get real blurry, is very, very scary. We see a lot of that psychological sort of horror nowadays, but there are some, I think, that really do stand apart and do have merit. And I don't know, I'm hoping that that's the case with this one. Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban, the Dementors, couldn't sleep for weeks. Probably why it's my least favorite entry. It traumatized me. Oh my. I think a lot of people agree. Prisoner of Azkaban is by far the best Harry Potter movie. I've probably said that before. But yeah, like that one's up here. The rest, not even in the same ballpark. I really like that one. It's the only one I have ever really felt the need to return to. Much more artistically distinct, for sure, and just more well-made, and all the details and everything. I will say, though, I remember seeing the film and thinking, I think it's because that was around the time when Lord of the Rings was a huge craze, thinking that the Dementors lacked a lot of the physical presence that, maybe the ring wraiths had in the Fellowship of the Ring, as an example. They did so well in that film, I think, with just the anticipation and like the horror aspects of everything. The sound is just really sharp in it, shrill in a way that feels just really present and very brutal, which is weird for Lord of the Rings, because there's very little of that film that I think feels truly physical. But I think that's more just because that's the sort of thing that Peter Jackson was really good at, and he kind of came in through more of that campy sort of horror, which is why it works really well. But by contrast, I think the Dementors are nowhere near as dynamic on screen. They kind of fell flat for me, though the score used there I thought was very interesting, because John Williams did a lot of very unique things with that score, and he tried all kinds of different styles. There he had more almost like 20th century avant-garde sort of thing, which was, I think, cool. Carrie, during the prom scene, the whole movie becomes creepy later in the house and the ending. It gave me nightmares, and I could not sleep at nights because I would think of Sissy's terrifying look with the eyes wide open. She looks possessed, diabolical, and an actual murder. Yeah, so Carrie is one of my favorite horror movies ever, and also just one of my favorite movies of all time. I watched it super recently, so it is fresh on my mind. Yeah, I think it's very terrifying, but I think it's just everybody has their specific brand of horror, and I think this is scary in a way just because, especially the opening. I think the opening is one of the more terrifying scenes in a horror film, and one of just the better openings of an American film at that time. To me, that's true horror. It's true kind of humiliation, and it's more from the female's point of view. And I guess, I don't know, as a girl, especially a teenager, when I saw the film, a scene like that can really get to you in terms of things that make you paranoid, or just your worst nightmare. And the feeling of humiliation throughout the film, and just that feeling of being in a distorted teenager's mind, where, all the emotions are fluctuating the way they do, which is, like that metaphor for her ability to be able to move things with her mind and all that. It's a difficult place to be. It just is, being a teenager. And yeah, I think the climax of the film is one of the most operatic, most special climaxes to a horror film I've ever seen. But yes, also a good choice. Also a 70s film, so I get it. The final 15 minutes of the Spanish horror movie Wreck, I had to turn on the lights because I couldn't handle the terror. Yes. Okay. So Wreck, I think, is very interesting. And what you're saying, the last 15, 20 minutes is where it starts to get really, really good. When that movie came out, I looked for an American DVD version that I could buy instantly. And I used to watch it in college with my buddies every Halloween, and it would be a huge hit. It's a really good choice to watch with your friends. Order a pizza and watch this movie, because it is just an adrenaline rush, full-on thrills in that last 20 minutes, and I do think it's worth it, even though it does drag a little bit before that. But thrills and chills for sure. I'll pick two, La Ventura and Picnic at Hanging Rock. Just the idea that people can vanish into thin air with no clear explanation is absolutely horrifying. And sometimes there's never an explanation. H.P. Lovecraft was right when he said the strongest fear is the fear of the unknown. Absolutely. And that's one of my big fears as well. And I just reviewed the Blair Witch Project, and I talked a lot about that feeling of the earth just swallowing you and no one knows what happened to you. It's a relentless sort of feeling of just knowing that your life can be taken at any moment. And it's just that ultimate fear of mortality is where the feeling of, just disappearing comes from, I think. But yes, you've picked two films that do it maybe the best of any, or some of the best of any. But also just the sense of like the Gabby Petito case, of course, capturing all kinds of people's attention. And I do. I think it's for a lot of the same reasons. I think there's a lot of things contributing to that particular thing. A lot of it is kind of social media presence and whatnot. But just the idea of, yes, somebody disappearing and just needing to kind of complete that narrative, wanting that satisfaction and not getting it. It's a very, very scary thing. Jack Clayton's The Innocence, a brilliant adaptation of The Turn of the Screw by Henry James. The film creeped me out in the ways The Ring does. It's just completely drenched in atmosphere and foreboding. I also appreciate the subtle camera work because while black and white cinematography is gorgeous, the restrained camera work makes you really feel on the edge along with the character of Miss Giddens. So The Innocence, I think, is it's actually a very good film. And it's another one of those where it's really quiet and very gothic. So a lot of the fear comes from what you don't know and kind of more what you're anticipating to happen. And I don't know, I think that the book itself that it is based on, Turn of the Screw, it's very, when you read it, it makes you realize just how hard it is to be able to make a movie like that. Because it all is meant to be told from the point of view of an unreliable narrator. And so much of what you don't know, what you think you know, comes from the way that she's writing it. So how do you depict that in the same way, especially when it's that well done, in a way that is visual? Sometimes I do think that the film lacks a little bit in the creativity there, and I wish they had adapted maybe a few different ideas, but at the same time, I do think it's a really, really well-made movie that really captures the mood of everything they're going for. And I actually do think the end of the film is handled beautifully. It's a chilling ending. And yes, highly recommended, especially if you're more into those like gothic, romantic films that are all about like the paranormal representing like sexual repression, societal repression of a woman, all that. Not traditionally a horror movie, but Come and See is truly traumatizing and scary film. I don't usually get scared of horror because I'm in the mindset of being scared. But the reality of this one is what scares me the most. True horrors are the ones that are found in this world. Films like Come and See, Passion of Joan of Arc, Chernobyl miniseries, etc., etc. Well, you have picked two of the movies that are, very difficult for me to watch, Come and See and Passion of Joan of Arc. And I think the reason why those films are so powerful is because they are depictions of history, but they aren't detached in the way that a lot of historical films are made. A lot of times when you're making a movie like that is about a past example of something, there is all this pretense and respect and like this need to tell everything in a very important way, as though you're a history book. And these films do not go there. They go for everything else. So they're both shot almost like they are horror movies, very abstract, very much in the immersive feeling. It's all based on what is emotional, what is visceral. So when you combine a more like horror way of shooting something with the real horrors of life in that way, to me, that is the most terrifying kind of horror. Yes, I mean, those movies may not be horror films, and yet they're the ones that naturally affect me the most. So totally agree with you. The scariest experience for me was my first viewing of Hereditary. The horror and unexpected deaths of multiple important and innocent characters we are rooting for and care about, and the way smiling cult members stand in dark areas and the camera causing them to suddenly fade into the appearance mimicking the way one's eyes would adjust to a dark room. Simply horrifying. Thanks for the great content. Thank you. You've really described it very well. That's what was the most chilling to me about that film as well. It's just that you can subtly make out, those people in the darkness. And as children, that's the thing we're all most scared of, isn't it? That's why we all want our lights on when we are kids, because the darkness just, of course, represents the ultimate lack of control and always will. But yeah, I think Hereditary just, even though, I struggle with aspects of it, I think it did capture very much what I've been discussing about a lot of those 70s films, a lot of those late 70s horror films from American film that were so powerful, that were so off-kilter in a way that were very hard to put your finger on. And I think that Hereditary has that same quality to it. And it has a real appreciation of that aesthetic and the detail that went into it. I just wish it had a stronger ending, because had it come together in a way that made more sense, I think it could have been a masterpiece. I've seen the film many times, and there's so many things about it that I think that really stick with me. And I just hope that Ari Aster can really grow, because I think he is. He's already made, 2 back-to-back films that really touched a nerve just collectively, which is always really exciting. But yeah, that is the video. So thank you guys so much for watching. I want to say thank you to my patrons. As always, you guys are wonderful. Thank you for your support. If you are interested in becoming a patron, the link to support that is below, as well as the rest of my social media information. You can watch more videos here, and you can subscribe if you'd like. Catch you next time.